Hello coders, good evening. It is Thursday the 3rd of December. This is episode 83 of the podcast, the How to Code Well podcast, and this is live. So if you've got any questions that you want to ask me about me or the web development in general, then do ask and I will get to them throughout the show. Today's topic is going to be based on Git Stash. 5 reasons why you should learn Git Stash to improve as a developer. Now, I'm going to caveat this whole talk by saying that yes, I've been a developer for some time, but I've only recently just started doing Git Stash. And this has been based on my quest to try and do as little on a GUI as possible. I'm trying to learn Git on the command line. And I've been doing Git on the command line for a while, but it's only the things like the commits and the pushes and the pulls. I haven't really gone into the nitty-gritty of what you can actually do with Git on the command line. I've always just used a GUI. I use PHP Storm for PHP development and PyCharm for Python development. I've always used their kind of Git plugins. I guess they're plugins. They're features to do with Git. Because it feels safe. It feels nice. You know, you can actually see visually where you are in the GitHub or the Git or the Bitbucket or wherever it is. The branching, you can see what branch you're on and what you need to merge to. You can visualize that. There's other tools like Git Kraken as well that I know people have used. And I'm trying to move away from it. I'm trying to move away into the command line because I think it's quicker, more efficient, and there's features in that command line that aren't always available on in the GUI. So I made a point last week to try and do everything on the command line as much as possible on Git. There's a couple of times I had to go back into the GUI just because I felt a little bit safer because I was dealing with conflicts. I mean, that's a whole nother topic. Git conflicts. You know, they've led me up and I've lost sleep over conflicts. But yes, Git Stash. Git Stash isn't a feature that is available in a lot of GUIs. And I was using it last week. And oh my God, has it changed the way I develop? It's one of these things that I wish that I had learnt years ago. Because I think I would have just been a little bit more efficient. There's a lot of time-saving things with Git Stash, which we'll get into. We'll get into the weeds in just a second. A couple of things before we get into the talk, just to say, I hope I fixed the lighting because I now have this nice little ring light. It's still quite dark behind me, but I'm hoping I have fixed the lighting on this side of the room. And also another one is that the Discord link, our howtocodewell.net/Discord link, should be working again. So I was live streaming on Twitch on Sunday and I was raided, which was amazing. And a lot of people joined in, which was great. And I mentioned, hey, I've got a Discord server, and someone tried it, and of course the link broke. It had expired. I wasn't aware of this, unfortunately, because I don't have any monitoring on it yet. But it's working now. I fixed it after the stream. I pushed up the change. So if you go to howtocodewell.net/Discord, you should be able to click on that join link and join our Discord server. And I must say, it's a bit embarrassing. I don't know how long that has actually been offline for. What happens with these Discord links is they can expire. And obviously the one I set had expired. So anyway, that's just a little bit of housekeeping. Talking about the howtocodewell.net site though, obviously we're building this on Twitch every Sunday. And it's working really well. And we've just got the code notes for the courses because the site's going to hold all the courses. And this is community driven. And the beta testers, because we've got a bunch of beta testers, they are really, really working hard writing these community notes, which is fantastic. You don't have to be a beta tester to write these notes, but we have notes now on things like the PHP strings, and other sort of tutorials, the HTML tutorials as well. We've got some notes there too. When I say notes, it's kind of like bridging the knowledge gaps that the videos don't actually give, so that they enhance the learner's experience. So I am super happy with the way it's going. And on last night, forgetting what the days are, last night, after work, I fixed the Prism.js on that site to show the syntax highlighting of the code notes, because the code notes are in Markdown. There is a code notes repository that people can put the code notes on, and then it goes through Gatsby, gets built, and then with the syntax highlighting, you can say whether it's PHP. You can define the language in Markdown, and then the syntax highlighting will highlight those. So all of these features that I've just mentioned, they're not available on the howtocodewell.net website at the moment. This is all in the beta site, and you have to be a beta member to access all of these features. But once I fix some other bits and pieces and add some features, I will then move the beta site over to the production once I'm happy with it. And obviously I'll mention that as we go. But I just wanted to make that point and thank all the people who have helped so far with the code notes. It's been awesome. Anyway, let's get back to the show. It's all about Git Stash. I suppose I should start by explaining what on earth Git Stash is, right? So essentially, this is a way of stashing code, right? Stashing code away, which means that you can work on something and then move it away from the repository into your kind of like little isolated area, which is so cool. And I'll give you an example of why that is. So let's say, for instance, you're working on something and then this happens quite regularly, right, as developers, and someone asks you to do something else. So you have to change your focus, you refocus on something else, you do something completely different to what you were doing just a minute ago. But you don't want to lose your changes. This may require that you have to, this change that's been requested, this task that you now have to do, perhaps, for instance, there is a bug on production and it's all hands, you have to just fix this issue. If you're not working in a branch, or even if you are working in a branch, and you want to save your changes, but you don't want to commit those changes, maybe those changes that you currently are working on aren't ready to be committed, then what you would do is stash them away. You would stash them away, which means that you can then come back to that stash later on and then switch that branch. Because, as I mentioned, as we go through the list, stashes can be sort of like, you can see the stash regardless of what branch you're on, which is awesome. I'll give you an example of what I was doing last week with a stash. So I was working on this command, this script, and this script took probably the best of say 6 hours to run. So it was 4, 5, 6 hours, something like that. It was very long. It basically consumed. It was like the black hole of the day, and I needed to keep the branch that I was on active. Otherwise, the script would fail. I couldn't just switch my branches and work on something else. And at the time, the branch that I was on was up to date with everything else, which was great, right? So I could treat it a bit like master, okay? So it was ahead of master or main branch or whatever you call it, by the commits that I was waiting to be pushed up. And I also had on my things to do list several other tasks that I needed to do that weren't related to this script that I was running. And I was getting very annoyed because basically I had anchored myself down to this long-standing script. And in hindsight, what I really should have done is spent some time spinning it up in a VM somewhere to then run that, offload that somewhere else. But anyway, I needed to keep an eye on this thing. So what I did was I worked on the other tasks, but what I did is when I got to a place where I was confident that the code was okay for these other tasks, I would stash them. I would create a stash. So some of these tasks required me to create new files. Some of these tasks required me to refactor and change some of the methods, some of the functions, and which weren't related to this script that was long standing and running. But the thing is, what I couldn't do was I couldn't just check out another branch and then work on this because, or switch or do anything because this script was running. I was kind of locked into that script. So what I did is I used stashes. So I ended up with 3 or 4 different stashes that all had stubbed out code for the other tasks that I wanted to do. And then as soon as that script finished, I was then able to apply those. I was able to create a branch for those particular tasks, and then apply the stashes to the branch, and then push those branches off and do the usual pull requests. But it meant that these stashes that I was creating, I was able to just create some code and then stash them away. They went away from the repository, which meant that my script could continue and I wasn't going to affect that script. They're also useful for debugging. So let's say, for instance, you want to just change some of the code just to see how things change. Maybe you're changing a statement check, an if condition maybe, and you want to just check, if one condition works and if another condition doesn't work. Then what you would do is you would create like an A/B test, and you would stash the A test, and then you would run the B test, and then you could do a diff between the two, the stash and the current set on your the current code, so you can see what changes. That's quite a good way of using stashes too. But the fact is, the stashes allows you to create sort of pockets of code that don't interfere with your current workflow, which is super, super cool. And how many times do you? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how many times people commit code if it's on a really regular basis. But now what I would do is stash code until the code was, in a completed, committable point, and then I would apply the stash and then commit that. Also with stashes, and we'll get into the. I know we'll get into the list and the weeds, but with stashes you can also create branches from them. You can push those stashes up as well, so you could have your own little sort of stash of stashes, if you will. So stashing is really, I found it incredibly useful, especially when I was running that script, because as I was running that script, I was able to work on 3 separate tasks. And each of those tasks had their own stash. And then what I did was, once that script was finished, all I did was I then created a branch for each of the stashes, right? Because they were individual tasks. I didn't want to put them all together as one commit, because that's just not the way to go. Because they were totally irrelevant, right? So your pull request should be nice and defined. You shouldn't be doing code here, and you shouldn't be applying lots of features in one pull request. Just in case one pull request one feature doesn't get approved, you have to approve the whole other thing and all of that stuff. So keep your pull requests, keep your features separate. So a pull request per feature perhaps, or per bug fix. So what I decided to do was create a stash per feature that I was working on whilst this script was running. And then when the script finished, I created a branch per stash and then tidied it up. There's a couple of scripts that I run to make sure that the PHP stan, for instance, PHP lint, some checking and all of that kind of stuff to just make sure the syntax is okay. And then once I was happy with that, I would then push that up as a pull request and then drop the stash. And then I would just do that repeatedly. So basically what I'm saying is, with these stashes, I was able to queue up the work that I had, to queue up the work that I was going to do after the script had ran, which made me, as a developer, far more efficient. I was able to work on multiple things whilst my laptop was completely, was working through this long-standing script, and I couldn't switch the branches until that script had finished. But what I could do is I could work on individual features that had nothing to do with this script, stash those up, and then once my script had finished, I would then create a branch for each of those stashes, push them up, and hey, the script finished, I had 3 other pull requests ready and waiting. So it was great. It was awesome. So let's get into the 5 reasons. The 5 reasons to learn Stash. And then what I'll do is afterwards, I will talk about. Actually, let's change it up. What I'll do now is I'll talk about some of the commands with Stash, and then after that I'll give you the 5 reasons of why you should learn Stash, because then you'll get some context. So there is a Git Stash. So these are the commands. Git Stash list. So this will list out the stashes. Essentially, when you write this in the command line, you will have a list of your stashes. Each stash has an index. So you can apply, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. So what you can do is you can identify, you can focus on a particular stash by its index. Git Stash show, which is super useful, does a diff. So this gives you a differential between what you're currently doing, which isn't stashed, and what is stashed, which is so useful, especially if, like I said, going back to the A/B testing. That's really useful. And then you've got Git Stash drop, and you put in an index as an argument. So Git Stash drop 1 will drop the first index. Git Stash drop 2 will remove the second one, and so on and so forth. Git Stash apply will apply the stash to your current working set, I suppose, right? So let's say, for instance, I had stashed up some code. So when you stash code, what you do is you remove it from your current branch and you put it into a stash, right? So it's kind of like you're saving it for later, that kind of stuff. When you do a Git Stash apply and then you pass in the index, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, now find that stash based on that index and then apply that to my current code. Now, the difference between apply and pop, so Git Stash pop and then the index, is that when you do Git Stash pop, what you're doing is you're popping off, you're removing a stash. I think it's just Git Stash pop. I don't remember if you have to put it in our argument or not. I'll look that up later. But Git Stash pop will apply it and remove it from your from the stash. So if you know that is the stash that you want to use, do Git Stash pop. It'll pop it off, and then it will remove it from your stash list. So Git Stash apply I find that better, because then what you could do is Git Stash drop after you've done an apply. It means that you are more in control. And as this is a feature that which is relatively new to me, I prefer to have that sort of level of control. Okay, Git Stash create will create the stash. And you can also apply a message, which is super useful, because, they say that when you do a Git commit, you should be committing small portions of code. Well, when you do a Git Stash create, you use the same idea. So you could end up with loads of stashes just with small little changes, and then you can do a Git Stash show, and you can get the difference between the stashes. Which is handy, very handy. Oh, yes, and then the other one is Git Stash branch. Now, this is super cool, because this will, so let's say, for example, you're working on the master branch or the main branch. So your main line of code, right? And and I do this all the time. So I will work on something, and then I'll forget the branch that I'm on, and the branch is the main branch. It's not a new branch. So you could do Git Stash branch to then create a branch off of the stash that you've just done. So you would do Git Stash create. After you've written the code, you do Git Stash create the stash. Once you're happy with it, you would then do Git Stash branch, and then you would create a branch from it. The amount of times that I've gone and created a branch with a branch name that doesn't actually correctly represent the feature or the code that I'm actually working on, because as I've worked on that code, the definition of what I've named that branch has changed. Maybe as I've been writing that code, I have thought about the naming conventions or thought about what it actually is, and so the branch name doesn't actually reflect the actual code or the feature or the bug I'm working on correctly. Now, I know that some people use, say, issue numbers for bugs, branch names and stuff. That's fine. But this basically means that you can create a Git Stash, and then you could create a branch from that. So you are thinking about what you're going to call the branch without having to call the branch something straight away. So that's really useful. Okay, so let's get into the 5 reasons then. Let's get into the 5 reasons why I think that learning Git Stash will make you a better developer. So the first one is Git Stash can be used across branches. So you're not tied down to the branch that you've created the stash from, right? This means that you can jump from one branch to the next, which is so handy. So, for instance, if someone wants you to do a pull request, and you need to, and perhaps with that pull request, you need to actually pull the code, so the code is actually on your machine. So it's not just a case of just reading the code. You actually have to pull that code down, because perhaps that pull request requires you to run a script or something. This means that you actually need to change your physical code, right, to someone else's code. Well, if you did a Git Stash beforehand to stash what you were working on, you can come back to that. Your stash isn't tied down to the branch that you were working from, which is so handy, because you can just switch from branch to branch to branch to branch, and then you could do just Git Stash list, and you would, regardless of what branch you're on, and you can see your stashes, which is good. If you're working in a team of people, like I often do, and there could be 2 people working on the same issue, right? And I'm not just saying front end or back end. It could just be 2 back end developers working on the same issue, and they have one branch, you have another branch, and you're trying to solve the same problem but doing it in different ways, perhaps. And you need to switch between that other person's branch and then your branch and back again and so forth. Well, you could have a stash of certain changes that you want to apply to both branches. Again, this makes it super effective and useful. Okay, so number 2, I've already mentioned this. Branches can be made from stashes. Again, as I'll just reiterate, so you don't have to come up with the branch name straight away. So if you clone a repository, you obviously get the main branch. If you want to then create a feature for that repository, but you don't know what to call it, you don't know what it's been, you don't know what the branch name should be, then just create a stash and then create a branch from that stash once you've decided what that will be. Also, stashes can be named, so this is number 3. So with Git Stash, if you don't name them, you have to look at the indexes. So 1, 2, 3, and that can get a little bit confusing if you've got lots of stashes. But what you can do is you can give them they say a message. You can give a message, a bit like a commit message. So you can actually put in a note to say, this stash is this. Or you wouldn't say that. You would say, fix for blah, 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 or adding variable blah, 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 or doing something here, whatever. So you can then read your stash list and you would see the messages per stash, so you know which one you want to look for. So when I was back when I was doing the other week, when I was working with stashes, when I was running that long standing script, what I did was I created in the stash message, I added the bug number that I was working on, or the feature number that I was working on, which meant that I was able to identify exactly which stash related to which future feature that I was going to create a pull request from once my long-standing script had finished. Number 4 is untracked files can also be stashed, which is super handy. So if, for instance, you want to create a new class, say, for instance, you are, let's say, for instance, you see a God class. So this is a class that has absolutely all the responsibilities under the sun. And you want to do some refactoring on that. You want to refactor some bits and pieces. What I would do in that case is normally pre-stash days, what I would do is I would create a new file, and I would call that, and I would call the old file, like I would suffix the file name with old or BKP for backup, which isn't great. But now with stashes, because it's untracked changes, because you can actually create files that aren't tracked in Git, you can push those up. So it's -u. So you can do git stash create -u, and then you could create a stash that includes untracked files. Which will make my life so much easier, so much easier. And then using the diff, you can get a difference between what is in the stash and what is on current. So then you don't have to have all of these stupid file names. One is old, one is new, one is _1, one is _2. There's no need for that. What you would do is you would create a single replacement class, and then that would be untracked, right? So you're not going to commit that up. You're not going to commit God class old _1. You wouldn't do that. You would create that file that would be untracked. Then you would stash it up, right? And then you would use the diff to work out, the difference between your work in progress code, the stash code, and what's currently in your current branch. Anyway, the last one is, as I mentioned, the diff of the stashes. So you can do a diff of a stash, so a stash and a stash, or you could do a diff of the stash and your current code, which is so handy. And the diff, I guess, this warrants its own video, diff, because you need to learn how to read the difference of code. You have the pluses and the minuses. You need to know what has been removed and what hasn't been removed, that kind of thing. The line numbers and so on and so forth. If you see this in, say, Git, you see a diff in GitHub, then what usually happens, they color code it. So the green stuff is the code that has been added, and the red stuff is the code that has been removed. And when you're obviously working on the command line, it's not colored, right? So you see the minuses and the pluses, so you can see what is removed and what is going to be applied. And just being able to identify that quickly, so at a glance you can see those kind of things quickly, that is very, very, very useful. And to be able to do this on code that isn't yet in a repository, so in a stash, and you're doing a diff against the stash and the repository, or a stash and a stash, that is incredibly useful, incredibly useful to work out what's changed, what needs to change. There's lots of little things that I would do, like, for example, if for instance I needed to do a little quick change, then I would put that in a stash, because and I wasn't too sure whether that would work or not. I'm not too sure, don't know. Then I would put that in a stash. Like the A/B testing, as I mentioned. So the code, say for instance there's a bug. Let's run it through. Let's say for instance there's a bug. Okay, so there's a bug on the system, and what you do is you pull down the main branch, so you get the current set. And let's say I've been doing a lot of work with console scripts, as you can probably guess. So let's say it's a bug in the console script, and let's say you need to not only download the whole main branch, but you also have to download or pull the database to get a copy of the database, to get it into the state so you can replicate the issue. Okay, so you've done that. You've pulled your main branch down, you've pulled the database down, so you are now in the same sort of similar setting as where the bug is. Okay, so now you need to run a command, but this command is going to take a little bit of time to run. So, and you've got a fair idea as to where the bug is, right? You've got an inkling because you've read the code. You kind of know what's wrong. But you want to do some sort of A/B testing. You want to kind of see, running the code that hasn't got any changes is obviously going to fail because that's where the bug is. But let's see if we can make a change, right? Let's see if we can make a change and then and apply that change if that change works. Okay, maybe you've got a couple of ideas. Maybe you've got a couple of ideas of how to solve this issue. What you could do is you could create a series of stashes. Each stash has a potential fix. And then what you could do is keep running the script. And each time you run the script, you just apply a different stash that has a different fix. Or maybe, as a case that I've done recently, you want to compare the performance of one thing against another thing. So what you would do is you would pull down the main branch. You know it's going to be really super slow because there's the bug is to fix the performance. And so what you would do is you would run that. You would get your timings. So that's the base level. Okay, so it's taking this long. Fine. Okay, let's now try and do a fix. Try and do a fix. But I want to be able to revert back to the previous state so I can get back to the base state. So normally what you would do is you would write the code and then you would revert it back and then you would go into the history to get it to bring your changes forward and all that stuff. No need for that anymore. What you do is you create your potential fix, you stash it. So now you've got a stash store of potential fixes, and you apply each one. You apply one of those fixes, you run the script, you time the script. Okay, so that was 10 seconds quicker. Fine. Okay, let's now apply the next stash. So let's put it back to the base level state and then apply the next stash. Okay, so this was 20 seconds quicker. Okay, so there's a little bit of performance improvements that we can do there. We'll use stash 2 over stash 1. Okay, there's another fix. There's another potential fix here. Okay, so let's put it back to the base to where it was. Let's apply stash 3 to it. Okay, no, this is actually taking 30 seconds longer. Right, okay, so I don't want to use stash 3. I don't want to use stash 1 because that's only a 10-second quicker. I want to use stash 2. Fine, let's do git stash apply 2. Apply that stash, and then let's do a git stash clear to clear the stashes after we've done the pull request. And that's kind of how that would, just imagine trying to do that without stashing, trying to come up with those 3 potential fixes without stashing. It would just be an utter nightmare. So with stashing, you can basically sort of store up these potential fixes and then just test them out one after the other, and then choose the one that you want. So yeah, stashing will make you a better developer, in my opinion. Whew. So that is Git Stash. And like I said, I am on a quest to try and get to try and use Git more often on the command line. And it's proving well. It's proving well. I must admit, I haven't really got to the nitty-gritty bits of dealing with bad conflicts with Git on the command line. I would probably lean back onto the GUI for those kind of things. And when I say to be a better developer, if you've literally just started learning to code, then I don't recommend using the Git on the command line. And I know that sounds really gatekeepy, but the thing is, the command line is a scary place. Scary place where lots of bad things can happen. So I recommend learning Git through a GUI, so where you can visually see the changes that you are making to your decentralized repo, and then pushing them up to a remote repo to get used to that, get used to the merging, get used to seeing the logs, getting used to seeing the graphs, the graphs whether you can see what's being committed in, what's being merged in, that kind of stuff. And then maybe play with the command line. But you want to be getting. I personally think that you should get used to a GUI first, because then when you get used to a GUI, if you use the command line like I'm doing, and then you get yourself into hot water, you can then always revert back to using the command the GUI, a nice safe space where you can actually visually see what's going on. So I haven't really got into the depths yet of learning things like cherry picking and all of that stuff off of the command line. It's something that I mean, this is why I haven't done a Git course. This is why I haven't done a Git course at all, because I don't feel like I know enough about Git myself to be able to teach others. But as I go through and I find, I discover these certain features, then I will use this channel as a means to promote and talk and discuss about those things. And it might be the case that I have missaid something. If I have, then please let me know, because everybody's learning. I'm learning all the time. But I think 2021 may be the year where I do a full project in the command line and then just use my IDE to write code. It's a scary thought, but I think that might happen, which is really interesting. It's kind of like I've got the feeling like I had when I switched from Windows to Linux. I could kind of anticipate that was happening in the future. I was like, I'm using Linux far more. It got to one of those balancing points where you would turn on your computer, and what I was doing is I was doing a boot load between it was like a boot partition between Windows and Linux. That's how I started learning Linux. And so I would boot into Windows, and then when I wanted to learn Linux, I would boot into Linux. And that happened for a while, quite a long time. And then eventually I would start booting into Linux and not into Windows. And then eventually I would start applying doing the things that I would normally do in Windows in Linux. And then I would be sharing files between the boot partitions. And I would just be getting more and more used to Linux. And then Windows just faded away. It took a very long time to get comfortable and get used to. It was Ubuntu at the time. I did Ubuntu and Fedora and SUSE and all of that stuff. But it took a long time. But there was a point where I could feel like I knew the same level of Linux to the same level as Windows, or at least I could see that there was a shift going on. And I kind of had that feeling now with the command line with Git and Git on a GUI. It's kind of that really weird feeling of, I know how to do this in both the GUI and the command line now, and I can do it 10 times faster in the command line. So what am I going to do? I'm going to use the command line. Oh, I need to do this now. Let's have a look. Let's research how to do this particular Git thing. And what am I going to research? Am I going to research to do that on the command line, or am I going to research how to do that in a GUI? I'm going to research how to do it on the command line, because I'm getting used to the command line, and that's how the GUI starts to fade. And then hopefully by the end of next year, it'll be like everything is done. Every Git command I do will be on the command line, and I'll just zip through things. And hopefully, I'm even thinking about creating my own aliases on the command line for Git. And if I do, I'll let you know which ones they are. It's gonna be wild. I'm really looking forward to 2021 in terms of my progression as a developer. And also, I'm looking forward to how 2021 is going to be with the How to Code Well YouTube channel. I'm streaming here on YouTube. I also stream, of course, on Twitch. And there is a reason why I'm doing this, because being a streamer on both platforms. Because I want to broaden my audience. And I want to do more podcasts live, because I want to eventually get guests on and do guest interviews live, and I think that's more of a genuine conversation, or it comes across as a more genuine conversation because it's live. But it also means that if Twitch goes down, which is something I fear, if Twitch falls flat next year, then I can move on to YouTube, and I would have a stock of live streams to work from. So yes, I know that the audience here is smaller than what I would do on Twitch, but it's slowly bringing that up. So there's a little bit of planning and strategizing with that. But also what I'm looking forward to, of course, is the tutorials. Now, I'm not going to give anything away because I've done this before, unfortunately, where I've mentioned that I was going to do something and then it never happened because life got in the way. So I'm not going to talk about the specifics of what is going to happen in 2021. But just know that I'm currently recording tutorials that are scheduled to go out in 2021. So I'm in that mode now. I'm in the mode of getting stuff ready for 2021. And it's going to be an interesting one, I think. We're going to probably take the same sort of steady course. I think Mondays is going to be the tutorial day for, well, it kind of has been for 2020, and I think that's how we're going to keep going for 2021. So there's going to be a tutorial every Monday that goes out. So there's 52 tutorials planned. I'm not going to talk about what they are. The howtocodewell.net website is really going well. It's unfortunately not where I think it should be, but and it's certainly not where I had planned. If you had watched the roadmap that I did, I can't remember. It was like 6 months ago. So we haven't met those targets, unfortunately. I will do another roadmap for 2021, but it's going to be exciting. It's going to be a nice platform, I think, and I'm super happy with the support that I'm getting on Twitch. Anyway, happy coding, everybody, and I will see you again next Thursday for another live stream, and take care. Happy coding, everyone. Speak to you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.